Beliefs influence our perception and reality of the world, and they change the decisions that we make. Welcome to the Food Matters Podcast, your home for health and wellness. My name is James Colquhoun, filmmaker and founder of foodmatters.com, and I am your host on this journey to inner and outer transformation. Hi, it's James here from Food Matters, and welcome to this 7-step masterclass on transforming your life, healing your body, and helping take this life-saving message through your living example to your family, friends, communities, and even beyond. Today, we're going to be centering this masterclass around the core premise or this primary question of, can you heal your body without expensive drugs or expensive therapies or continual access to medical or healthcare professionals? This is the million-dollar question, and we're going to be diving deep into it. In sort of personal development sort of theory, there's this concept that success leaves clues, which also leads to this idea, I believe, that failure leaves clues. And as a modern society, there have been many failings, I believe, definitely in researching a lot around nutrition and natural therapies, where we've made mistakes, and this has caused a deleterious or negative impact on our health. But there is a small but growing group of researchers, doctors, nutritionists, and naturopaths that are showing and bringing research to light that there is so much that we can do to heal our bodies naturally and really without so much reliance on medical professionals or on drugs or expensive therapies. Today we're going to be talking about that. And if you're suffering from autoimmune conditions, leaky gut, or persistent weight gain, blood sugar regulation issues, maybe mood issues like depression or anxiety, or hair loss or skin issues, or even chronic conditions like blood pressure issues, or even heart disease or cancer, then the truth is you're not alone. This is so common. In fact, statistically, in the developed world, we are more likely to be prone to chronic illness than we are to being vibrantly healthy and well. And so we're going to be looking at what are these 7 steps, which is really the distillation of knowledge that I've had the humble privilege of being in front of many experts and researchers over the past 15 plus years in my capacity as a researcher and filmmaker, creating 5 featured documentaries and films, and interviewing on top of that hundreds of experts from around the world. And this is really the distillation of that knowledge to help make this knowledge in a way more profound, in that it can be more digestible, pardon the pun, for you to be able to apply in your daily life. Because knowledge is only potential power. It's really about how do you put knowledge into action, and that's what we do here at Food Matters. So I've got some notes here to make sure I don't miss anything for you in these videos, because I want to be able to deliver as much information to you as possible. But I also want to be able to, sort of my mission and intention for this masterclass is to deliver to you sort of an invitation and an opportunity, the same that I offered my father. In about 2003, my father was suffering really severe chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, anxiety, and he went and sought the help of the medical profession. And that resulted in him taking up to 6 different medications at one time. He'd put on a lot of weight, his health continued to decline, and he spent many years bedridden. And Laurentine and I, my partner, really struggled to be able to deliver the information that we were researching to him because he didn't believe us. And one of the problems right now is that natural healing is not really in the mainstream narrative. However, it was the only narrative up until recent times, and we know that because indigenous cultures live this narrative. However, my father really struggled to take this knowledge on board. And it wasn't until we started interviewing experts from around the world that were esteemed nutritionists, naturopaths, researchers, medical doctors, that he started to pay attention. And this was really the raw interviews that became our first feature film that came out in 2008 called Food Matters. And when he saw these interviews, it completely shifted his life and the understanding about how his body works. And he immediately started making shifts in his diet. We did a pantry audit where we sort of contraband the not so good food. Remember how I said success leaves clues and also poor decisions leave clues? Well, we've got a lot of knowledge about that now in the nutrition and natural health field. So we contraband those foods. We okayed a whole group of foods. We started to detox his life and body. And within a 3-month period, he'd lost 50 pounds or about 25 kilograms, which was the weight that he'd put on over this 5-year period. He had regained his energy. He was off all 6 of his medications, and he was back to running 3 times a week, up to 10 kilometers at a time, which is probably about 4 or 5 miles. So this was an incredible transformation. And since that time, his life in so many other aspects, not just from a health aspect or perspective, has continued to shift. And this really now means that he is part of chanting and meditation groups. I mean, he hangs out with completely different people. When we see each other, instead of shaking hands, we hug for awkward long periods of time. So I want to warn you that making healthy lifestyle decisions can spill over into so many other areas of your life in terms of your inspiration and purpose and passion and fulfillment, but also in terms of deepening connection with those close to you and your family. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I would like you to revisit these a week, a month, or a few months later. First of all, why are you here today on this masterclass with me? What are you working on, or what would you like to fix about your life or your health? Is it a particular condition? Is it an excess weight problem, an autoimmune condition, a gut issue? The next question I'd like you to answer is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you in your life right now? How much joy and happiness do you experience on a regular basis? Now, this might seem like a little bit of an anecdotal or a different question, but still, 1 to 10. And then, how healthy and how strong do you feel right now? How strong do you feel in your body, in your immunity, in your health? How robust do you feel in terms of being able to ward off disease or your body be able to fight something that's impacting it? 1 to 10. Give me a sense of that. Now, I'd like you to think about what you would like your life and health to look like in the short term. So let's say 3 months from now. My father was able to lose 50 pounds and get off 6 medications in 3 months after 5 years bedridden and really struggling with his health. So that was a profound shift. And I know people are able to shift their health in even a shorter period of time, but what would you like your life and health to look like in 3 months from now? Specifically your health and your body. I think that's the focus for today's masterclass. 3 months. Now, what about 12 months from now? So maybe you envisaged some changes in 3 months' time, but what about 12 months' time? How do you envisage your health, your body, and your life in 12 months' time? So 2 goals there, 3 months and 12 months. Now, there's some sayings in the business and health world that we tend to overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Well, with our health and body transformation, I think our body is a supremely powerful machine, and its capability to transform is rapid, provided it's got the right environment. So I think maybe we can tend to overestimate what we might want to achieve in 7 days or 14 days, but underestimate what we might be able to do in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. So keep that in mind, and also make a note in your notebook or in your phone to put a note in your calendar 3 months from now, 12 months from now. Hey, check in on my health goals and come back to this and see where you're at, even a month from now, because you might be surprised at what's transpired. So keep these notes and refer back to them. So here we go. Step number 1 on the 7 steps to transforming your life, your health, and then helping be a radiant beacon of light and hope to transform not only your life, but the lives of others that you have the privilege to touch. The first step is going to seem a little bit obscure, but it's called education, or educate yourself. And the reason why this is so important is that we are conditioned beings. And up until Bruce Lipton, who talks about this, who's one of the teachers in our certification program, talks about from really 3rd trimester up to 7 years of age, we are a downloading machine. We are really taking on information subconsciously into our brain, and we've developed this capacity or capability as a human species so as to be able to learn without being cognizant of what happens. This is called precognitive learning or precognitive subconscious conditioning. And just like we can have precognitive trauma, so trauma that happens before we're able to have language to sort of speak about or understand our experiences. So this is how we learn at that stage, and we still learn like that as we're older too, when we're in more meditative or hypnotic states. But then we also learn through education, through educating and bringing in information into our prefrontal cortex. However, we've handed over most of our education to mainstream media, to social media, even to universities, which we think are these benign, happy, healthy institutions that are going to give us all the information we need. We hand over our information, our education, to experts and medical doctors who have received training from these so-called education systems. But the problem is we live in a capitalistic world. There's no real problem with that. It's just the system that we chose instead of socialism or instead of communism, we chose capitalism. And the idea is that, well, if we have commerce and business, then that will create companies and affluence, and that will trickle down to people that have less. And this system, in some respects, works, but it also has many faults. One of the faults is that the exchange of information is really owned by corporations. And corporations, whether that be in the big food industry or in the pharmaceutical, we call it big pharma, big food, big ag, pharmaceutical, agricultural industries, their core premise or their core modus operandum or raison d'etre, reason for existing, is really about increasing profits and adding more value to shareholders, because that's how the system works. Again, there's no problem with this. However, what it creates is an issue of ethics, where we have a problem where the ethics of the industry are focused more on profits instead of patient outcomes. And so when you go and study at a university, say nutrition, for instance, that university will have research departments funded by big food companies who are seeking to have a certain outcome. Or if you're studying medicine or biomedical science or whatever it might be, you go to a university, but then the university is funded by the pharmaceutical companies who are doing research in that organization. And this tends to influence, as I'm sure you can understand, education in a very scary way. Jerome Byrne, one of the experts I interviewed, who's a medical researcher and journalist at The Guardian in the United Kingdom, speaks about how you only need 2 successful clinical trials in order to be able to receive a patent for a medication. Now it might have changed, maybe it's 3 or 5, but very few. You can also have 10, 20, 30, 40 that failed before you have the 2 successful. So we have a very skewed system when it comes to education. And if you're thinking about educating yourself, we need to think about how do we find these 2 very important things. And this was something that Laurentine and I were looking for when we decided to study nutrition. We came up against this issue because we were reading books of many researchers who were warning us of this very topic. And then we started researching universities or places where you could study nutrition online to receive a certification. And we had to find out how independent they were. And I guess one of the other issues we have is that when we go through our schooling system, they don't teach us about core issues that we're going to come up against in our life. Like, they don't teach us about finance and abundance and how to do our taxes, which is a big part of life, let's be honest. They also don't teach us about relationships and how to be conscious in our relationships and connection with other people through methods of like nonviolent communication. They also don't really teach us about health and well-being. And look at the light coming in here now as I say that. And the reason, I don't know why they don't. They teach us, I know why they do. Sir Ken Robinson, the late Sir Ken Robinson, who I had the opportunity to interview for Transcendent Season 2, talks about how the education system was really built to create more employees, to create more workers for the industrial era. And this means that the founding intention of the education system was to create employees, not to create people who are able to solve their own problems. So we have this huge issue. So the 2 things I look for when studying nutrition or filtering education or information, and this is the food matters philosophy that we've embodied as filmmakers and researchers, but also in putting together courses and now the certification program, is really about having independent research and advice and having independent researchers looking at that independent research. And there are many of the people that you'll see in our films and experts that are part of the certification program. Then the next thing that we overlap, which is even more rare to find in an educational institution or online, which is a filter that I think is one of the most important filters, is this anthropological filter, or looking at what we already know to be true about the healthiest, happiest, longest lived people on planet Earth right now, and bringing those 2 together, because science can sometimes be siloed in this cerebral world that doesn't really look outside into nature. And that's okay, because it needs to have this methodical approach to science and data. However, to also add over the top of that independent research, science and data, or meta-analysis for that matter, an anthropological spin, observing ancient traditions and cultures, observing their natural medicine practices, observing and researching the longest lived people on planet Earth. This is where you really have powerful information. And this is the distillation of information of the experts that I'm going to be referencing and referring to today. And the reason why education is so important is because education shifts beliefs. Now, we think of beliefs as some abstract idea. Well, you believe in unicorns, or do you believe in UFOs, or do you believe in whatever? But it's actually scientific. Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, some of these experts who talk about this, great teachers, they show that beliefs influence our perception and reality of the world, and they change the decisions that we make. And I found this to be so important when I was helping my father make his transformation, because he had the belief that, well, if I'm sick, I go to the medical profession. Or he had the belief that if I'm not well, I should go shopping and I should look for the products that have the heart tick, or that have the approval from the Diabetic Association or the Heart Health Association. Or I look at the food pyramid and see I should eat from the food pyramid, not knowing that all of that information has been bought. It's science for hire that has essentially been influenced and sold to us as this idea. And if you look at the Meat and Dairy Board, they were providing education resources to schools in the 50s and 60s, even going into developing countries and handing out free milks to school to help improve the sales of their product. So the insidiousness of our education system influencing our beliefs, what we believe to be true, like milk makes a body good, or that milk it gives you more calcium and stronger bones, which has been debunked, or that mercury amalgam fillings are safe to put in your mouth, or that smoking causes low-weight babies, or that asbestos is safe, or whatever it might be. Things that we were sold by industry that have now been proven to be less true than we might have originally thought. So we need to be really careful about this, because I'm going to try to do this left to right, which is going to be my right to left. So first of all, you have education here. Then education shifts your beliefs. So the source of your education is the most critical first step in your transformation, which is why I'm focusing on this. And if you educate, and if you allow your education to come from the mainstream media, or from bought media, or from bought institutions, or from science for hire, you get a filtered view that benefits them and not really you. Not all the time, but most of the time. We've seen this to be true in historically speaking. So if you have independent research and advice, that creates different beliefs. And the different belief that my father created was that instead of, well, my body is sick and I need to go to the medical profession, the belief that my father that created through different education was that my body is has an innate healing capacity, and provided I give it the environment to heal, it will do the work necessary to regain homeostasis. And that's exactly what happened to him, because once you have this belief from the education creates the belief, then the beliefs shift the choices that you make on a daily basis. So if you don't believe your body, you are what you eat, then you just eat whatever and you take an Alka-Seltzer afterwards, or an acid. Then after that, once you shift your education, then your beliefs, then that shifts your choices, and the choices you make on a daily basis create the outcome of your life. So to understand this process, education, beliefs, choices, outcomes, means that you now understand the most important pathway to transformation ever in the history of the entire world. And so making sure that you have good independent research and advice is hypercritical, and that is what we have built Food Matters on, and all the films and all the experts that we've included, and that I'm going to be including and talking about in this research and as part of our certification program. Do you feel overwhelmed by the amount of health and nutrition information out there? Are you tired of spending your time and money on specialist appointments only to be left with more questions than when you arrived? You're not alone. If you're listening to this podcast, you most likely value your health, feeling good, and want to be able to take the best care of yourself and your loved ones. And why shouldn't you? At Food Matters, we believe that your body is worthy of good care and that no one is more suitably qualified to care for it than you. This is why we have created a world-class nutrition program designed to help you transform lives, including your own. It's called the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program. Studying nutrition changed my life. It helped me cut through the confusion of paleo, veganism, plant-based, intermittent fasting, and more to experience lasting energy, vitality, and improved health on all levels. In the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program, we've assembled the greatest minds, independent from big business interests, to share with you the most trusted research on nutrition and healing, including experts such as David Wolfe, Dr. Mark Hyman, Andrew Saul, Krista Orecchio, Dr. Libby Weaver, Dave Asprey, Dr. Alejandro Junger, and many more. So if you've been thinking about studying nutrition online or want to take your health into your own hands, head to foodmatters.com/study to learn more and join the waitlist to be the first to know when enrollment opens again. Have a great day. I hope that helps as a starting point. I know that's not really a teaching point. I haven't really given you much information, but I've given you a framework of how to create transformation in your life and a framework to help share with family members and friends, because I know once you start to get passionate about this information, you want to share it. So my second step right now is detox your life. Dr. Max Gerson, one of the most famed and revered natural medicine doctors in the world, who developed a detoxification protocol essentially for helping severe migraine patients, and then was able to use that same protocol to be able to even heal more chronic conditions, and eventually it became quite a well-known cancer therapy, and it was called the Gerson therapy. And so Dr. Max Gerson's daughter, Charlotte Gerson, he has a son too, Howard. Hi, Howard. Charlotte, I had the opportunity to interview her before she passed away, and she featured in the Food Matters documentary. She passed on his information, and essentially his premise around chronic illness or any sort of disturbance in the body is really boiled down to two things. And one is a lack of nutrients and a buildup of toxins creates disease in the body. So if you want to reverse disease, you need to get rid of toxins and add the nutrients. So we'll talk about the nutrients component later, but let's first talk about toxins and detoxification. Since World War II, after that war, we started to take chemicals and biological warfare chemicals that were built for war means, and we started to bring them into commercial applications. So we started to bring chemicals into agriculture, we started to bring chemicals and preservatives into our food system, we started to bring chemicals into our cleaning products, into our delousing products, or into morphine, bug sprays, etc. And since that time, we've released over 40,000, and many more actually as we keep going, chemicals into our environment, into our food systems, into our agriculture. And this has started to accumulate, these toxins have started to accumulate in our bodies. And we've never had really exposure to these toxins before. The types of toxins, there are naturally occurring toxins like metabolic toxins that occur as a byproduct of eating food or radiation from the sun. But typically these are toxins that we've developed a capability over hundreds of thousands of years, let's say, to be able to work within the body. However, the man-made toxins we have not developed this capacity to work with and understand. And the problem is that our regulatory industries, which again are more predicated on profit than patient health and outcome, really approve these toxins on a single toxin basis. However, they don't really understand the implications of multiple toxins sort of combined in this cocktail within the body. And there was an environmental working group did some research on pregnant mothers that gave birth, and they took samples of the umbilical cord blood, and there was over 200 man-made chemicals in that umbilical cord blood. So from day zero, we have toxins in our body. And these toxins can cause not only disruptions in hormones, which are this sort of chemical signaling of the body, but also they can disrupt cell function and lead to chronic illness and disease, and also lead to persistent weight gain, cellulite, and fat, because as Dr. Alejandro Junger talks about, toxins are lipophilic or fat-loving, And so when we have too many toxins in the body or too much stored energy in that we're eating too much food, because eating too much food can be like a toxin, then our body seeks to store those toxins in the fat cells, and this results in adipose tissue. And so a sign of being overtoxic is you feel fatigued, you might have weight gain, you might have illness or chronic illness conditions. And so toxicity is a big impetus in chronic illness. And we know this to be true because toxins can cause cancer. A very popular weed killer that's sprayed on most all of our wheat crops, which is one of the most, according to the food pyramid, one of the most advertised food groups that we should be eating more of, and that's mostly eaten by people in the morning, cereal and toast, and then there's milk put on top of it. They spray this product on the crop multiple times, but then especially just before it's harvested as a desiccant to dry it out. And this is Roundup or glyphosate, and it's only just been discovered, and the World Health Organization has recognized this, that glyphosate may now cause cancer. So if you're exposed to certain toxins that can cause cancer, these are called carcinogens, and I believe it's a class 1 or a class 2 carcinogen now, that this means that we know toxins cause cancer, we know toxins can cause illness, and yet in the mainstream medical profession they say, well, detoxification is mythical and it doesn't have any effect on the body and you shouldn't worry about it. And then you've got doctors like Max Gerson who are assisting detoxification pathways and able to help many patients, even last end-stage patients that are coming to him. So let's talk about detoxification. I know I'm going quite fast here, but I want to try give you as much information as possible. We have 4 primary detoxification pathways in the body. The first one is breath, then we have skin, then we have urine, then we have feces. They're the primary ones. And we have organs that help process toxins in the body. But if you think about breath, the yogic tradition, which is a big area of study for me now, from sort of 2,200 years ago when Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras, and then there's been some methodology developed thereafter, and then right back to 3,700 years ago, one of the most ancient spiritual philosophy texts, the Rig Veda, was written. They're sort of alluding to this fact that we need to be cleansing and clearing our mind and our body. And so yoga has many types of breathwork practices to do this, like different types of clearing breaths or agnisara or breath holds or retentions. And so breath work is really powerful, or just exercising and breathing to help facilitate that process. Then we have the skin, which is a major organ for detoxification. And so we have ancient practices and cultures around saunas or heat therapy or hot and cold therapy. And we're hearing more about that now with Wim Hof or sauna work or infrared saunas, how powerful they are to detox the body. So incredible there. And so what I'm going to focus on now is on the urine and the feces. So the most important way that we can support the detoxification pathways through the urine and the feces is through hydration. And hydration is such a simple and powerful way that we can support these processes. So if I had the unique opportunity of studying emergency critical care when I was studying to become a ship's captain, and one of the most unique things that I learned is that if I'm picking up, say, a refugee or a shipwreck survivor on a remote island or been drifting at sea for 2 or 3 weeks, and I bring them into my care on a ship, the most efficient way that you can bring hydration to that person is by implanting water up the colon and putting a sort of a 2-liter or more implant of water into the colon. And this then soaks immediately into the bloodstream. So a couple of interesting things from this here. One is that we take water from our colon into our bloodstream. The second thing is that this is a really important detoxification practice that Dr. Max Gerson talked about with the Gerson therapy, where he was taking patients with severe migraines or even chronic cancer and putting them on enemas or colonics on a regular basis in order to draw toxins out of the body, but also the hydrating effect that this water can have in the colon. A more simple way to do this is to just drink more water and or eat more high water content foods. And the way that we do that is through starting our day with a hydration ritual. So first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is to take a big glass of room temperature water. And you can put a little bit of salt with that, we are salty water in our bodies. When you go to a hospital, and I did some time in theatre, when they bring people in, one of the first things they do for just about anybody is to put them on a saline solution. Now, many orthomolecular medicine doctors, and we'll get to this in later points, would suggest that we should be putting them on zinc and some intravenous vitamin C as well to support the immune system as they're going into an environment which is a challenge for most immune systems. However, we hydrate them with saline solution. And the universe tells us this as well. The world tells us this. We are 70% salt water in our bodies, and the earth is 70% salty water. So to have this saline solution, which helps to facilitate the electrification, communication pathways of the body, is hypercritical. And if you think about the body at night, we're going into a deep rest or sleep, or at least we're sleeping deep. Then we start to move into more of a dehydrated, over-acidic state. And this state means that when we wake up, we want to support that through breaking our fast, breakfast, with water, with a more alkaline approach to the morning so that we can cleanse our system and support our body's natural detoxification pathways. And if you drink a lot of water in the morning, you'll notice that you go to the toilet, you may do a number 2. This is great. You want to be facilitating those pathways. You can also add some lemon juice or lime juice to your water. Citrus helps to break down mucus in the body. Citrus and lime in water has been proven to help with weight loss as well. And if you think about weight loss, that's also liberating these toxins that are in the fat and helping them and allowing them to break down and be passed out of the body. So lemon and lime juice in water is great. I know some people that use apple cider vinegar. You can also put some cayenne pepper, or you can grate some fresh ginger and fresh turmeric and put that into your water as well by adding more medicine in. There's so many wonderful things you can do, but avoiding that cup of joe, that cup of coffee first thing in the morning, which is a diuretic, it pulls water out of your body, is hypercritical. Avoiding toxins first thing in the morning, like bread. We spray wheat with glyphosate, which is a toxin, which is Roundup, which is really a pesticide that has been shown by the World Health Organization and been proven now that to be a carcinogen and that it may cause cancer. We're ingesting this in the morning. Most people are having coffee and bread in the morning with margarine, and this is a really unfortunate start to most mornings for most people. And so I want to sort of shift that approach for you, suggest a new alternative, invite a new idea according to some of the research we've been reading. And also, my father shifted his morning ritual from having coffee and bread for the breakfast. He would wake up and have water with lemon juice. Then he would have some sort of green juice or other form of juice. Then he would move to having sprouts. He had fresh sprouts, mung bean sprouts, I remember, with lime juice and a bit of salt for breakfast, or some vegetables or a little bit of fruit. This was a vastly different experience for his body than waking up and having bread and coffee. And it started to support his body's own natural detoxification pathways. And when you really understand how important it is to detoxify our body, to support and give an environment, to provide an environment for your body to heal, you'll see that this is such an important part of your day to shift and to change. What are some of the ways that you're going to be supporting detoxification in your life on a daily basis? Maybe it's some of the hydration rituals we just spoke about, or maybe it's going to be some other processes that support detoxification, like doing some sauna or doing some skin brushing to support the epidermis of the skin, to support the dead skin moving off and new skin coming through. Maybe you want to consider some enemas or colonics to help clean the colon out to support that pathway. Maybe trying some more breathwork practices in the morning, or some ancient traditional yogic breathwork clearing practices to support that practice. So many ideas and things that you can do. Maybe you want to do a juice cleanse or a fast. I mean, fasting is a powerful way to bring more healing energy to the body, because as we eat, we put so much stress on our digestive system. It takes up so much energy. It's little wonder why we have a big meal at Thanksgiving or Christmas and we want to sleep. And when we use up a lot of that energy, it takes away energy that the body can use to heal naturally. So maybe you want to consider a juice cleanse or a water fast or something to this nature in order to be able to allow the body time to break down and digest toxins, support those detoxification pathways. And as the body does that, which is a natural process and it does on a regular basis if we provide it space, it's going to have more energy for healing, and it's going to have less toxins to deal with so that it can bring your health into a greater state of well-being. We are going to get into step number 3, which is upgrade your diet, adding in nutrients so that you can support your body's capability to heal and be vibrantly healthy and well. The body deals in a currency called nutrients, which is vitamins and minerals, etc., and minerals and cofactors and all sorts of things. And it uses those nutrients from food intelligently. What an incredible system, which is created from the ground, from the information in a seed that's able to then produce this, taking matter from the air and the environment and the soil and through water, create nutrients and colors and phytochemicals in foods to be able to help our bodies heal. And we have been having a really beautiful, natural, direct relationship with nature over many centuries. In doing this, in eating natural foods, and in recent history we have imported into our food system in many ways fake foods, frankenfoods, GMO foods, chemically altered foods, and as Chris Carr says, a great teacher and an amazing force for good, she says that if you eat too many foods made by people in a white coat, you're going to end up seeing more people in a white coat as you get older. And so I think one of the things that's interesting when we start to look at diet is that people say, well, we're doing it right. In the West, we've got a higher average lifespan, so screw you and your crazy dietary theories. I'm just going to keep doing what we're doing. Well, something I want to add here is that there's 2 chinks in that armor. The first one is that most of our data on death involves people that have been dying in the past 20 years, and some of them were born sort of pre-World War I and II that are long-lived and spent the first 20 or 30 years of their life without any toxins or chemicals in the environment, or much fewer than what happened after World War II. So that's a big thing to consider. So we're saying that, well, how we're eating in the West is okay because we're living longer. Well, that's one issue, because the first 20, 30 years of those people's lives was healthy and free of toxins. As I said before in step 2, detox, children are being born with up to 200 chemicals in the umbilical cord blood. So it's a very different world we're entering into. The next thing is that then we say, well, indigenous cultures, well, they have a lower life expectancy. Well, there's 2 key factors that contribute to that. One is infant mortality, and the other one is trauma, death by trauma. So it's a little bit more dangerous to live in an indigenous culture because you're out gathering, gardening, and hunting, let me call it, and you're using a knife, you're climbing trees, you're doing all sorts of things, and so there is death by trauma more often in that culture. So if you normalize the death by trauma and you normalize the infant mortality, and you go and experience actually being in indigenous culture, you see that there are healthy, long-lived people, and their old people actually live longer. Many of the old people in the West die longer. You know, as Patrick Holford says, also one of the teachers in the certification program, we have this situation where people are living longer, but they're dying longer. And it's a strange term, but it makes sense when you think about it a little bit. Our medical system keeps more people alive longer, and even though they're unhealthy, and that's a great patient model to have if you're in the business of making money. So think about that for a little bit. Also, one of the things I wanted to touch on about diet is that your genetic heritage will impact your food choices, what's going to work better for you. Where you live at the particular point in time of your life right now will impact what's best for you and your immunity in that climate, in that environment. And also your age, and also what you're suffering and going through, and your stress and these types of things. And this all sort of get wrapped into this one sort of concept I'll call biochemical individuality. So we need different things at different times for different people at different stages. So if you're a menopausal woman, or a 20-year-old woman, or if you're a 30-year-old Inuit living in the Arctic, or if you're an indigenous Polynesian living in the Pacific Island, or if you're a white Westerner, or if you're a Westerner, let's say, European living in America, or if you're African living in America, or African living in Africa. There's so many different combinations. So we need to take not only a scientific viewpoint, which will just say, well, you know, plants are better for it, people just eat more plants, or they'll say we need to eat more of this and less of that. That's just the nutritional science viewpoint, which is great, and we need that information. That data is really important. The next thing to overlay over the top of that, like I'd mentioned in the education step, is more of this anthropological viewpoint that gives us more of a holistic understanding about how to craft a diet that's best for us. So taking all that knowledge, so if you're Asian, you have very little history of dealing with milk or dairy products, whereas if you're a Northern European, maybe you have a little bit more history of dealing with that, and maybe some cultured, organic, natural dairy products may work okay for you if you're living in a northern latitude and you need a concentrated form of sunlight to get vitamin D when there's no sun outside. So having an understanding of all these nuances is going to help you craft it, as opposed to just saying all dairy is bad. I would say, well, yes, it definitely can be for Asians, and it definitely is for most people, 100%. We're not really designed to eat the milk of another animal, and you will never really see that often in indigenous cultures. However, there are cases in extreme locations where you don't have access to sunlight. How do you get concentrated forms of sunlight in the middle of winter, aka vitamin D? And we know now that they can improve immunity, and we're seeing research on that with certain viral conditions as well. So vitamin D is very important. You can get it from the sun, or you need to get it from food sources. And many of those food sources are animal products. Some are not. Now, at Food Matters, I think the general philosophy is sort of around a term is that Michael Pollan coined, which is eat food, mostly plants. And I think that that speaks just volumes to what we see when we start to study indigenous cultures. And John Robbins, a dear friend of mine, and a great teacher, and he has some lectures in the certification program, talks about how these indigenous cultures mostly ate plants. Yes, some of them were more vegan or vegetarian, and some of them had some animal products, of which those animal products were very high quality. But this really speaks to where science overlaps with anthropological knowledge and understanding. So one of the things I want to warn you about, which is something that I suffered from early on, is I bought into nutritional dogma. When I learned about raw foods and how you cook foods, it kills nutrients, I'm like, well, raw foods is the solution for all of humanity. And I bought into the dogma. And I was going to raw food events where people were coming up to me and saying, how raw are you? 60%, 80%, 100%. There was like this judgment going on about how raw you are. I see this also in the vegan movement, in the animal rights movement, and I love and support all of these movements. Don't get me wrong, I'm a part of those movements. However, I think that dogma can not always serve the greater good. And here's why, and there's many reasons to eat different types of diets. Maybe it's for health reasons, maybe it's for animal rights reasons. But I'm talking about health here today, and if you're suffering from a chronic illness and you need something particular that might go against your dogma, it can be a really difficult challenge point for you. So instead of buying into the dogma of veganism, vegetarianism, pescatarianism, lacto-ovo-vegetarianism, whatever it might be, high-fat, low-carb, low-fat, high-carb, I would suggest adding a new filter over the top of that, and not to impose this as a dogma, but more as an invitation to say that you're a qualitarian, and that you eat high quality, organic, local where possible, in-season foods, and that the combination of those foods is mostly going to be plants with the other percentage of whatever that might be that suits you in the most ethical, sustainable way possible, so that you give yourself that flexibility to ebb and flow over time. And so if you're dealing with more chronic illness and you need to be more on the detoxification pathway, then it's definitely more of a plants, more of a cleansing, more of a juicing, more of a hydration, more of a light thing. If you've got gut issues or you need to rebuild some more systemic things in the body, then it might be a little bit different. So I just want you to use maybe a new filter for how you might label yourself. Not that we should label ourselves or anybody. And that might help free you from dogma, so that as you change your opinions about life or health or diet, that's going to give you a little bit more freedom to be able to make those changes. Make sense? Okay. As a species, and I've had the unique privilege of also spending time with indigenous cultures in Vanuatu, which is a small remote island in the Pacific Ocean in between Fiji and Australia, and going to remote islands in that archipelago that rarely see white people, and then going into their homes and hiking into jungles, into their gardens. It's clear that, and Daniel Vitalis talks about this, who's one of the teachers in the certification program, it's clear that we are, he says hunter-gatherer gardeners, but I like to say gatherer, gardener, hunters, because hunting's sort of the hardest thing to do. It's typically more difficult, and in the culture that I observed, it's not done as frequently as gathering or gardening, because they're lower cost, lower energy capabilities to create food and resource and sustenance. And then hunting is a little bit more difficult, and they typically eat less animal products in those indigenous cultures, at least in the temperate belt that I was observing, and in many of the other long-lived cultures around the world. Not to say that the Melanesians are long-lived, or the Polynesians, some Polynesians are. The Huntans, the Abkhazians, the Okinawans, the Icarians, they are also mostly plants, and they mostly gather and garden. And these are ways that we've learnt to collaborate with nature to be able to collect resources to nourish ourselves and have beautiful long lunches and spend time with family and friends. And it's not all about food. I'm talking about food now because food is a very powerful central point. It's a mechanical way that we nourish ourselves and can have a huge impact on your health. But the psychological components, which we'll go into a little bit later and in the certification program, go much deeper into understanding how those non-food components can impact your health. So as gatherer, gardener, hunters, they would mostly gather things like seeds, nuts, berries, herbs, seaweeds, and root vegetables and tubers. But they would garden root vegetables, tubers, taro, yam, manioc, these types of things, and they would produce foods using those natural products. And they would also not do any sort of industrial mechanization processes. So if you look at what we've done in the West in terms of the advancement of modern food and agriculture, we have gone and industrialized our food system, which means we have gone and said, well, wheat is great. It's a plant that gives calories, and we need more calories in the West. So we started growing wheat, corn, soy, these big monocrops. But then we chop down with these combine harvesters in this industrial process huge amounts of wheat. Then we process it in factories. We can process massive amounts of it and make massive amounts of breads and pastries and cookies and other processed foods. But from an indigenous perspective, if you were living in a culture with wheat, you're producing very small batches. It's a smaller part of your diet. It's a lot of work. And I like to give people this idea of thinking about, okay, so if you want to make a raw food cake with almonds or cashews as a base, or if you want to make artisanal bread, or if you want to eat rice, some of these grains that have become, or nuts in the healthy community, that have become a very big part of our diet, what is the actual physical trade-off if you didn't have mechanical equipment to get that product? And it's quite difficult work. If I'm eating a native almond, a nungai nut, or in Vanuatu, it's a lot of work, you know, with a knife, boom, 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 to crack it open to get one. So you typically eat 6 or 8. And you don't eat more. But when you go to a supermarket and you've had a mechanical agricultural process where they have monocrops of almonds and they ship in bees from Australia to California to go and pollinate those crops, and it's sucking a lot of water out of the system, and then there's mechanical shaking of trees and processing of the nuts. We don't see that, and so we eat more of them, but naturally we wouldn't eat so many of them. So I'm really asking you to question even natural foods. The volume that you eat should replicate the energy that it takes to get it from the environment, because that's more natural to what we've experienced for thousands of years up until only 50 to 100 years ago. A different spin, and this is again me talking about nutritional science and anthropological integration, I would say. So there are some things that don't really make sense that much in the modern diet though, and I'm going to talk about some of them. And I'm not typically a person that suggests taking things out of the diet. And David Wolf's philosophy for diet change is more about adding in good foods to crowd out the bad foods. I totally agree with that, but there are some offenders that I don't like. Well, that science and these researchers don't like. One of them is modern dairy. You look at the way that modern dairy is produced. I mean, John Robbins, who was the sole heir, or one of the heirs to the Baskin-Robbins ice cream company, saw these pictures of the sepia-toned cows on the walls of the Baskin-Robbins ice cream places, and then he went to the factory farms and he couldn't believe what he saw. And it's not what happens there. And really, the way that modern dairy is produced means that we have a product that is very unnatural and very unhealthy. Now, sure, if you live in a very a latitude that you need a concentrated form of vitamin D, or you have a goat that you tether or tend to, and that has a family and a life, and it's an integrated collaborative experience. Maybe small amounts of that raw natural product is okay, but the way that we've done modern dairy, it's just not really supportive for most people. The next thing is refined oils. This again speaks to the fact that we've mechanized oil production, and so we have unnatural large amounts of oil in our diet. And there's many extreme people that say we shouldn't eat any oils, but we always get fat from foods in our diet, whether it's avocados or olives or some animal products, for instance, like anchovies or other more highly fastly replicating fish that have less impact on sustainability, that are more sustainable. Then we get fats from those sources, but to now refine fats and press fats, we're getting unnatural amounts of them in our diet. So we need to regulate that again. So if we use fats, we need to be careful what we use. So things like olive oil, coconut oil, and a little bit of maybe cultured butter, if that works for you, or ghee, may be okay in small amounts, but typically we want to get most of our fats in a whole form as we eat them. And there's great research now with Cyrus Kambata, a great medical researcher that talks a lot about this in one of the modules in the certification program, where he says that the introduction of all these oils and fats is implicated in our pancreatic capability to secrete insulin, which is leading to diabetes and persistent weight gain. So these oils and these fats, in particular trans fats or the margarines, and they're in so many, the solidification of oils into so many processed foods is just an absolutely horrific thing for human health. And that we need to disintegrate and get rid of out of our diet as much as possible. But not exclude fat. Fat is also really healthy. In the 80s, we said, don't eat fat, and we went all high carb, and that was an absolute failure. Our brain is mostly fat. If we want to function and be cognizant and really take part in that first point, which is educate yourself, you need a healthy brain. Your brain is made up of fat. It needs healthy fats. We know this. High omega-3, low omega-6, omega-9 is anti-inflammatory. An anti-inflammatory diet is so healing. We need these essential fatty acids, or EFAs, DHA, EPA, and they can be found in flax, in chia, in egg yolks, in certain healthy, sustainable animal products. They can be found in other nuts and seeds. And these fats are really important. And so to eat more fatty foods is a great thing, but to get it in a whole food source automatically regulates that, as opposed to this mechanization of extracting oils. Again, science and anthropology. The next thing is refined sugar. We would naturally eat sugarcane, and I eat sugarcane. When I was hiking through a village, and we were walking through the bush, and these mamas came past, and they saw that we didn't have food on us, and she just grabbed something and gave it to us. So this is what you do. You exchange food when you're in the wilderness. She gave me a piece of sugarcane, and we went and chopped that up and ate the sugarcane. And there's so much anecdotal research about the plantations in the Caribbean and in Central America, where the plantation owners were eating the refined sugar products and were obese and suffering from diabetes. And the workers who were doing physical work but eating the whole sugarcane were not suffering from those issues. Again, the mechanization of food and refined sugar, creating high fructose corn syrup and sugar, acts like cocaine in the brain. It lights up the same centers that cause addiction. We've become addicted to refined sugar, and we need to look for more natural sources. So natural fruits, dates, more whole forms of sugar, and or natural sugar alternatives like coconut sugar or rapadura sugar or things like this in small amounts is a better step. The next thing is refined grains. Again, this is a big thing. Like I mentioned before, the mechanization of grain, corn, wheat, soy production has created an unusually high amount of those products in our environment and in our food. And that is not natural. It's not normal. If you go into an indigenous culture, they might have a few different types of heirloom corn growing, of which they might dry or eat or this, but it becomes a more naturally regulated staple in the diet, as opposed to an unnaturally extracted, used form. And then many of those corn, wheat, soy products are fed to factory farm animals, which is an unnatural process, which makes those animals sick, because those grains are high in omega-9, low in omega-3, so you have inflammation, you have disease in those animals, and then they're fed antibiotics, and then they're killed, and we eat sick, dead animals. I'm not saying be vegan. Yes, be vegan or vegetarian if you want to stop that. 100% agree with that. But if you do want to include some animal products, do it in the most healthy, most sustainable, natural way possible, so that you're not causing the suffering or the negative impact on the environment, and you're also helping support the healthy rearing of an animal so that it's a healthy product, not an unhealthy product. So it's eating its natural diet. No fake sauces or spreads, really going back to fermented foods. All indigenous cultures had a fermented food with their food. If you think about sushi and pickled vegetables or pickled ginger, you think about fish in Scotland and Ireland, they would have tartare sauce. You think about sausages or meats in Germany, good or bad, doesn't matter, but they have sauerkraut. Or if you think about vegetables in Germany, they have sauerkraut. You think about tomato sauce or tomato sauce or ketchup, that was fermented tomatoes. It's no longer. It's high fructose corn syrup and tomato concentrate. No to really refined carbohydrates and these pastries and bagels. They're a recent introduction. I mean, maybe small amounts, very rarely, is not going to have too much of a negative impact on health. And I occasionally have gluten night every now and then and enjoy myself maybe once every few months. But ultimately, we've relied on these products too much. And we should be moving more towards what the indigenous culture used to create similar things, which is root vegetables, manioc, taro, yam. They would go and grate yam on the cut up edge of a palm frond and grate it and make a patty with a little bit of coconut milk, and that would be a pancake. So you can get cassava or manioc flour and sort of replicate that a little bit. So you're using a root vegetable instead of a grain to create that. So the question is, what foods are you going to eliminate and what foods are you going to improve or add or increase in your diet? And I'm going to share just a quick testimonial here with you because I love this lady's testimonial, and this sort of, I think, speaks to the effect that overlaying this nutritional science and anthropological impact can have on someone's diet. Her name's Jackie, and she writes this here. Over the years, I put on a lot of weight due to having Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. So this is an autoimmune condition where you've got a thyroid condition, as well as unforgiving and unhealthy eating habits. The weight and having Hashimoto's had a big impact on my health. I got to a point where life just became a struggle and I had to make a change. I adopted a mostly plant-based diet with occasional fish, gave up foods that I had developed sensitivity to, including dairy, soy, and gluten, just like we spoke about. I also gave up fast food, junk food, and almost all processed food. I added exercise, at first just walking, and then in the last 6 months I added in yoga, running, and weight training. I feel better than I have in years. I've now lost just over 100 pounds. Thanks Food Matters for guiding and inspiring me on this journey. What Jackie did is not rocket science. It's living science. It's what we understand about the human form and anthropological studies about long-lived people on planet Earth. And this, unfortunately, is not in the mainstream narrative, as I've spoken to you about before. And even in the mainstream narrative, people are being censored. So we need to maintain, and my wish and desire is that you can take this knowledge and share it with your community, or come and study with us and go deeper to be able to share this with your community in a deeper way to impact people's health. Because we used to share this information around a fireplace and pass information on in an oral tradition, like the yogic traditions, like oral traditions in some living cultures today. But we've replaced this with science and the commercialization of information exchange, and it's dangerous. So that's the first 3 steps of 7 that I'm going to take you through, and I hope you got a lot out of that. And I will be covering steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the next episode. I can't wait to see you there. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends and family on social media or leave a comment below. We love hearing from you. If you want to find out more and sign up to our podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode, head to foodmatters.com/podcast. And I look forward to seeing you next time.